Hey gang, um, on our second day we got started by reviewing some of the material from the first class, various techniques, etc., and then jumped right into working on day two where we began to talk about organizing the page, uh, basically doing some of the work that starts before you start doing most of your drawing, but underneath it, the foundations, the design, and sort of the map of where you're going to start putting some of those marks, those techniques into your finished product. We took a look at the handouts that came in over the week and moved forward from there. At that point, we started, frankly, to do something that I would call mapping. And there's a number of techniques we could use for that. You gather your materials, you start looking at whatever you're going to be drawing, and you begin to map out the page. You think about the design. Where do I want to put things? Yes. But you also begin to look at the size of things and how they're related to the other objects in the design, in the picture that you're trying to make. Shortly, I'm going to start drawing here, and you're going to see me starting with these basic materials, just these two erasers and three pencils, to begin to create an image that is somewhat organized and trying to create proportions between the objects using alignments and axis lines and that sort of thing, and the edges, to figure out where everything belongs. So let's get started and take a look. So we had two flower arrangements and some cups that we were using as our subject matter. And when I look at that, I immediately think, do I want the whole thing? So first thing I'll do is, I might do that and say, okay, there's sort of where the tall red cup is. It's a cone shape, it's truncated, and then there's the cup. I can't look at that and call it a coffee cup. I mean, I can't call it a teacup. It looks more like it's a coffee cup to me. I guess maybe because I look too much at what my mom's old teacups were. So then I've got the vertical glass vase, and before I even start to put the flowers in, they're sort of up here like that, maybe going way up there. As I look at that, I'm thinking, oh, that's not too bad. But then the very next thing that I want to do is, I've got a cup, and I'm thinking maybe I should bring the cup. No, I'm going to leave it there. But I'm looking at this. First thing I'm going to look at is this versus this. That thing that you were doing, putting an X or a Y or a Z or some kind of thing I can use. And as I look at that, I'm thinking, see how little I've got here? That's not correct. I'm looking at it and it's much rounder. So it's going to come down further. It's rounder than I had it. And it's rounder than that. It's much more like that. Maybe even more. Maybe more like that. And the second thing I'm going to look at is, oh, look how narrow this is versus how wide that is. If this is correct, then this has got to come out further. But I'm going to leave this one the way it is. On this side, I'm going to trim it here. If that cup was up here, I would have very little space if it's up. But as it's getting closer to being down below me, it's going back to round. Now, what you don't realize here, this is a hard one to do, the base. That is rounder than it would be if it was up here. This one down here is rounder than the bottom, the top is. But you don't see it because you're only seeing a little bit of it. But it is very round compared. I could only see the front end edge of that,
it could go around this way if the cup was tall and thin, but in fact, it's so squatty that it comes in and hides most of it. It also comes out further, and then I didn't get it quite right. It does curve there, but it's going to have very much a little sliver of a very rounded bottom. Now, I usually don't erase early on, except for this kind of stuff. We don't see that, but I tend to draw those parts even though I can't see them well. And the rationale for that is this. If I get that base there, and then I get the other bases drawn correctly, I know they fit as long as they don't overlap each other. But if they, sometimes I've done this more than once. Put something down and not drawn the back, and then drawn the other thing right behind it, and gone, oh, wait a minute, they can't occupy the same space on that ground. Now the next thing I'm looking at is this cup is way too tall. Its width versus its height. So that means for me, I'm thinking, rather than recommit the top to the bottom, I'm going to keep the bottom the way it is, and then I'm going to bring that cup. Yeah, that's better. It's not up here. That also gives me a chance to reassert how round it is. And so then there's that cup, and then just barely behind this, just behind the lip. If I lean this way, I can see the whole thing of the bottom of the red cup, but here, I'm sure they're having fun out there, but it does overlap, and I'm wanting, now the next thing I do besides this versus this, figuring out the height versus the width, the middle of this, I can extend that as sort of a thing I can judge things by. And what I would say is the cup, the red cup, is there, and it doesn't come across this, and it just barely comes behind the coffee cup. And then I'll use this height right here and compare it to the height of that. So I'm going to do that right here. I'm going to come up to the cup, measure from the bottom to the top, right there, and then I'm going to say, oh, I know that red cup is taller physically than this cup right here, but it looks like it's almost exactly the same size from my angle. So I can go from there to there, and instead of coming up to the top here, this is the back here. Okay, then I look, I can take an outside, just like I can take an inside line and see how far how it goes. You can also sort of box around it. There's a word for this that I learned in college. It's called blocking in. You build them in little blocks, little of overlapping shapes. And then what you do is you go, oh, is that angle correct? It seems to be pretty even on both sides, but is it the right angle? It's a little less, but not by much. Now, as I look at that, the proportions, I'm going, is it right? Is it in far enough? Is it just a little further in than I've got it? maybe. I might have just trimmed a little bit off the back edge here. And then I look at that and I go, then I can, at that point, I can begin to kind of get some of the divisions that are there. There's ridges, and I'm not going to worry about too many of those right this minute. But then once I think I've got it right, then what I might do, I won't get rid of all of it, but I might lighten it a little bit so I can see it a little bit better. But I don't want to get rid of all those because I can use those other lines to line things up with, to check. Because just as you can do this back and forth like this to see if it's correct internally, I can use those things to connect with other parts. I can see, does this little cylindrical thing come up? It comes up higher, yeah, okay. And it like this cup here, it is overlapped and it comes down lower, more like that. I will probably put a axis line through it. I'll also check this space versus this one. It's like 1, 2, 3.5. So I'll check the little piece of glass and go 1, 2, 3.25. I'm off a little bit. I'll double check this to make sure this is correct. I think that's basically right. So I have to come down just a little bit here. Oh, look, that was where I thought the line was, and that's basically where instead the back is. So a lot of times we will spot something and record it, but we'll record it as the wrong thing. The spacing will be right, but we'll put the wrong line attached to it, or it's just a little bit off. But we do that a lot because we're fallible most days.
So your vertical lines are for symmetry?
For symmetry, yeah. To keep it part of the idea is too, is it gives me something I can measure between. I can go, is the space between here and here, and here and here, and here and here right? So that gives me, I have internal measurements that I could use.
Mm-hmm.
So right this minute, these two look like they're basically the same. From here, that may be what's appealing to this for me, is that there's some similarity even though they're not the same thing. So I look at this again, put the cup line right through there, and then I go from the middle to the middle, then I go from the middle to the, yeah. That's probably what is appealing to me, is that this, even though it's not an obvious thing, oftentimes there's proportions that appeal to us even though we don't know what they might be. And they might not be equals, they might be 1 to 3 or 2 to 5. You know, there's all kinds of proportions that we like. The proof of that is when we listen to music. There's different proportions between the notes and different sound versus loud versus quiet. Anyway, so now the next thing I've got the hard part, all this organic stuff. But I don't draw the organic stuff first. Notice I got some geometrics going first. And then the next thing I'm going to do is they come up, sort of at an angle, like that. Yeah, it's sort of like that. There's parts of it that do that, and there's some parts that stick out over in here. And then there's a tall part here, and then there's the yellow part over here, and then there's the red stuff over here, and that's at a different angle. And these red flowers are here, and I might not be pushing them out far enough, I don't know. Now the next thing I would do, that's just me drawing the objects, right? But what I have not considered is what organization does this have? And I'm beginning to think that I will probably want to stop the piece, the edge of the piece, before I get to the end of the flowers. The flowers will go out of my proportional thing here. And I'm thinking I might want to drop that. Now, notice I'm drawing large, guys, as opposed to more of a sketch, because it's easier for us to see it when I draw it larger. But I'm thinking, then the next question would be, where do I want to come at the bottom? And as I look at this, I could be very happy with it way over there, giving a huge amount of space. Now the middle of the picture is here, halfway between, sort of between these two. And I put a lot of information on that side of the page, and very much open space here. And I might decide in this particular case that I could go, I could put the table through there, but I don't have to. But that would be a natural spot to go through. And then I also could think, we could also think about this and go, there's shadows, John. You really haven't attached this thing down here either. There's a triangular shadow here. And that sort of same thing is happening here, a softer outer shadow. So, but this is about the design of the page. Now, there's always more than one good design. I could just as easily come in and say, that could be an interesting piece. Somebody else could come and say, John, you're giving way too much importance to the cylindrical stuff. I want to pay more attention to the big open space and those flowers. That's what you have to decide, is where you want to do that. And what I would tell you, you can have a great drawing and you can really screw it up what the frame you put around it. You can come in too close, too far, but the trick is you're looking for heavily worked spaces, lightly worked spaces, nothing in it, way too much in it. It's okay to have way too much in it sometimes, because that might be what, if I was doing all this and had more light on it from this side, I would have way too much stuff in that. And the question is, do I want all that and have this almost nothing? Because I can leave this cup completely empty. In fact, I might think of it, as I switch over at this point to working with a 4B, I might think of it and going, yeah, I like the design on that cup. But what I'm really interested in the design on that cup being is a big dark area with a curve in it. That echoes the curve of the cup's lip. And a dark line down here. And I'm going to let that dark line be the last major thing in that cup up here. Yeah, I'm going to draw the cup, and I'm going to be very careful, and I'm going to get a little bit of a sense of rounded, slit curves. And at that point, I'll do a little bit on the inside. And guess what? At that point, I might be 99% done this cup. Have I left lots of things not said, not described about this cup? Absolutely. But I might be done. It don't have to be just because I say it now, because I'm allowed to change afterwards. But you get the idea that I am thinking that what I'll do with this cup is leave a whole lot unsaid. What I was going to say about it will be nice and clear and simple. There's a little edge coloration that goes around. There is a little bit down here. What am I going to do? Oh, yeah, then down here. Okay, I see what I can do. It comes down a little bit more like this. I'm thinking maybe I get rid of some of the dark line there soften that line. Do it less hard. Maybe even give a little bit of a hint of a little three-dimensionality with some shading there. And if I'm going to do that shading, I might give it a little bit of that same sort of shading here. And at that point, I'm thinking very much that I could be making a design decision. Does that mean I'm going to stay with this design decision? I don't know. But I'm thinking that maybe that is all I'm going to do to that cup. Notice he says that, and he keeps going. But maybe that's as far as I want to go with this cup, because I want to spend more time with, maybe I want to spend more time with the red cup, or maybe I want to simplify things over here and play with, I might then decide I'm going to do tons of information on this part of the flowers and very little over here. I can have, it's, at this point you're deciding where you want to concentrate. And I'm going to ask one person. Would you agree that as you look at things, you might look at different parts of it, and you might be interested in one part and another part someplace else, but you might not be interested in the things that connect them particularly? Well, you want to have a little something that connects them just so that they don't just float. But you don't have to pay a ton of attention to what connects them. You can be looking at this and that. In fact, as I look at this right this minute, it seems to be too equally, and then there's a break. I'll probably, if I keep this, I'll probably end up deciding to either diminish a little bit on this side or a little bit on this side so they're not evenly done, because I've got lots of detail here and then coming down in almost the same spot. I might break through it a little bit more to let my eye roll through it. But then spend more time here and more time up there. And then decide what parts. And I still haven't completely said where my format is. And that is probably the thing that will decide the most as to whether or not your drawing looks good, is knowing what your format is. Because it's kind of like, it'd be kind of like this. If I said, the best thing on my piece of paper is that eraser, well, then I would expect that camera to zoom in on that one thing, if that's the most important thing on the piece of paper. If I said, no, the relationship between this is a 6B, this is a 2B, the most important part of my drawing tools today were that eraser and my 2B pencil, you'd expect us to focus on those two. You might see the other two rationally, you'll see all of them, but I'm focusing there. And if I said the most important thing in this particular drawing was my kneaded eraser and my 6B pencil, then you'd be thinking, how do I focus on those two without seeing the others pretty much equally? And that would be the case of a designer saying, you're right, let's move it over. That'll be a better design. And then we would focus here, we'd see those. What's important for you to communicate or me to communicate can be very differently done and be very different in what we choose to communicate, but choosing where you want to concentrate your attention. So the skills I was talking about here are all about using the big shapes and using line to describe those shapes, and also those organizational lines that like you were using a little while ago, that idea of maybe having a vertical lines on the outside, maybe having a vertical line on the inside, having a horizontal line that relates to the vertical. It also helps you sort of pinpoint things. If you know where that is, then you can say, oh, from that right here to that, oh, I can check that angle out. I can go, ooh, I'm gonna go from the middle here to this corner up here, the same spot. I go there to there, it's that kind of angle. I'm close, it should be lower. No, it's probably, this should be slightly higher. But you know, that's what you do. You use those little X's and then the angles of things to check out the stop and start points. Always paying attention to the bottoms, the bases, the tops of things, and the outer widths of things. That'll help you get proportions from this big versus that big versus this big. And I will tell you right up front, this should come lower and this should also come lower. The more I look at it, I know that. It takes a while sometimes for us to see all the parts that as they get a little off. Make sense so far? All right.
So can you do some of what you would do with
The flowers, oh gosh, she picked the hard part, didn't she? Okay, yes, what I would
Just
probably,
an idea of how we set that up.
well, remember that in that illustration with the sheep?
Yep,
Okay, so would you agree there's a flower here and a flower here?
right.
So I'm thinking there's a flower I see most of, and there's a flower that I see more like that. Yes, I know it comes out and it's, you know, it's wiggly around, but then it's sort of like that and that. And this one overlaps this one. This one's more vertical. This one comes out here, and then there's a leaf coming this way, and then it's the partner to these. There's two of them. There's one in here hidden, right up here, but there's other stuff in the way, and then there's another one that I can see the stem of coming up here, sort of that another round up front, and then it comes back into a triangle shape, right? The base of the flower itself. And then down in here, I can see that one coming down further, and then it comes in, and I just realized that all of these things should be further out. Because if it's coming in here, it's not coming in, it should be a little further out. So it's not tons wrong, it's more like there, and then that is still there. Then I would come in and go, okay, then the next red one is up here that I don't see much of, because then there's this stuff happening. And then this one up here, and this one that's down below it. And then there's this group, another one here, and it's hard.
You would start with just the circle shape and then work.
Yeah, and
there.
then the circle shapes and the stem shapes, and maybe a wobbly leaf shape, like there's a wobbly leafy thing coming over here. And then there's some grouping that's not really circles, but it's sort of like, again, it's sort of like triangles,
Right.
clusters up here. And then there's certainly the yellow one, right?
Right.
And then from there, you can do some of that other stuff that's happening, you know, some of the darks that are down here, stems inside. And
Okay.
that's how I would do it.
Okay.
Does that make
Thank
sense?
you. Yeah, absolutely.
And then and once I've done any of these, then I check the angle, I check the size. Is this one really bigger than that one? Is it over to the left a little bit? Is it over to the right a little bit? I'm working much darker because I am working. Yeah, I'm just working, and I'm not worried about it because I know that anything I do, I can get rid of them if they're not quite right, and then I can come back in. But now I have tons of little bits of information to figure out exactly where do things stop and start.
Okay.
And then, so at that point, this one is, again, this is more of a circle, John, than you had it. So go ahead and get rid of there we go. Now I've got the top looking more like it should be. And if that's more of a circle, then this one's definitely got to be more of a circle. So now at this point, I'll be thinking, what do I want to do? And I might be thinking along the lines of, I'm going to make, it's very dark on this side here. It's dark here, but it's a little bit lighter here. I'm not going to worry too much about that side. I'm going to decide, I know that it's darker, but I'm thinking more along the lines of me making this dark, there'll be a little section that's a little lighter here on the edge. But what I'm trying to do, when I'm doing this, I'm thinking, oh, I want to support the cup and connect my cup to that shape. And then there'll be a dark inside here. And why do I want to do that? Because we weren't talking about shading, but I did do shading. Uh-oh. Because I'm thinking I've got a lot of darks up here, and I want to have a counterpoint to the darks up here. And I'm thinking, and like I said, I wasn't supposed to be shading. I was really thinking of shading like that, where I don't put a lot of shading in. I might put shaded hatching to indicate a dark shape. But the idea that now I've got darks that'll be here, and there'll be some darks in here, but mainly the darks up here, that'll give me a nice little break between them. And I'm thinking probably that I'm not going to include the table. I think it's a distraction. And now, of course, I don't need that anymore. That's why you draw all that other stuff, that stuff light. Because if you draw them light with an HB or a very light hand on the 2B, it all can come off if you need it to. But as he says that, I'm thinking, I do kind of like that little bit of a shadow over there. Because I can use it to point to the cup. Or to connect a little bit to the cup. And I mean the coffee cup. Making some sense?
Absolutely.
Okay. Keep going, and I'll come back around and start talking to you guys a little bit more about yours. And then I'll keep coming back and doing some more on mine.
Okay, so you've seen my demo, and I want to take a quick look at some of the drawings that folks did on our first part of our session today. And we are going to take a look at looking at line and the sort of the placement of things, how things went from just simple line and figuring that out to adding darks and lights, which I wasn't thinking about doing much today, but that's okay. We jumped ahead a little bit. So did I. So here we have, two objects drawn close together, and then sort of commenting on and looking at dropping in plumb lines or axis lines to see if things are coming out straight or not so much. And different folks tried some different strategies to come up with different ways of coming up with the image. And here we've got some lines that are telling us where things are going and where things line up. And you can see even as the piece comes to a conclusion, some of those lines are still somewhat visible, and that's okay. We don't have to get rid of them until near the end. We don't have to make them obvious all the time, particularly when we're sketching, but it doesn't hurt to have them, and it's part of how we think about things as we try to create them. So that's it for now. I'll see you guys next Tuesday.